You're listening to the Final Say Radio Show, a Rappaport media production, with your host Brett Rappaport and co-host John Rappaport.
I see that we've got our good friend David Pietrusza. David is a wonderful author of many fine books and a great historian, and we welcome you to the Final Say Radio Show. David, it's a pleasure to speak with you again.
Well, somewhat delayed, but here we are.
Oh, no problem. David, we're very thrilled to have you with us today, and because you bring such a depth of knowledge in history, especially with relations to past presidencies, and you're well-versed on all the recent presidencies as well. And we'd like to have a discussion on not just a Bash Obama discussion, but when we look at the policies that have been set forth since his time started in 2008, well, 2009 actually, but since he has become president of this wonderful nation and the things that he has pursued, how they relate to past presidencies and policies that have been pursued, and how this is relevant to the history of the United States going forward, and what kind of implications, ramifications, and whatnot we will be facing in the future.
Well, I think the scariest thing is this sort of rule by executive order thing, or rule by non-enforcement, by an executive nullification, whether it's the Defense of Marriage Act on the federal level or Proposition 8 on the state level with California. All of a sudden, executives don't have to obey the law, don't have to enforce the law, and then because they don't go and defend the lawsuit in court, no one else has standing. That's extremely dangerous to a republic or a democracy, however you want to define it. And Obama has certainly taken things to levels which no president has previously, but he's also built on over 50, 70 years of a wearing away of the Constitution and the constitutional safeguards. So on the one hand, he's entirely new, but he's also in a direct line with so much which has gone before. I think what is new is some of the interpretations of executive power and the levels to which he is willing to go forward. And also, say, the arming of Libyan rebels or Syrian rebels is not just a question of social issues on a domestic front, but also foreign policy. And the Congress did nothing in Libya when he failed to implement or obey the War Powers Act. And they say, oh, no, we don't have to report to Congress. We report it to the United Nations. Well.
Yeah, that's a good point. When I look at this administration and the actions, and I want to respond to two things you said. The first is Congress. I posted something the other day because it was very frustrating to me to see Congress, even some of the conservatives that we enjoy, will take to the floor and they'll make a statement, but they never take any further action. So I actually sent a couple emails to some congressmen that we bring on the program, and I said, what does it have to take for members of Congress to actually take an action that will legitimately stop this president's actions? And I don't mean just making a statement, because there are three courses of action. You could file something in the courts, you could defund the programming, or you could go through the process of impeachment. Now, of course, you have to, impeachment's a very serious thing, and you'd have to prove a case. But certainly the other two options are well, they may be lengthy, but they're viable, aren't they?
Certainly. And I think I just saw on the web today, either from Politico or Roll Call or one of those sites, And they were posing the question. This was not from the so-called fever swamps of the right. What happened to the Benghazi investigation? Okay? And what happens to Fast and Furious? These things drag on, and Darrell Issa, God bless him, does his work, but I see very little support from the leadership of the House or the rest of the party. So he goes out there, and these things drag on and on and on, and before you know it, the Obama administration and their apologists say, that's old news. That's old news. And so they get away with it, and there appears to be no concerted move to block these things. Yes, there'll be some nattering about, well, he's not doing what he should do, what the law says about Obamacare already. But I suspect there will be no actions taken. There will be no defunding of the program. There will be no defunding of the IRS control portions of it, which is seriously dangerous. And I think even in their more lucid moments, liberals would question that as to what the connection is between health care we have seen in regard to the IRS. And again, what's happened recently with that investigation? Very little. One hears sparks flying off occasionally, but that's about it. They go nowhere. These investigations go nowhere, not because they do not have merit, but because the people in Washington lack the will to do something about it. They are willing to play it safe, to protect their individual seats, and not create a firestorm, which they're not sure if they will control or which there will be a blowback. I think that the great fear is the Gingrich battle with Clinton, and that there's going to be some sort of penalty paid for standing up to simple usurpations or abuses of power.
David, I think you're spot on. I think you just pointed out two problems back to back that come together to create an absolute nightmare. The first was the sort of complacency effect, right, that people just sit back, they forget about things, a short attention span. And, of course, you didn't have to spend but 5 minutes watching Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom when we were kids to know what happens to what Mother Nature does to animals that have a short attention span, right? They very quickly become somebody else's lunch or dinner. But the second side of that is this lack of leadership, this cowardice, this inability to want to take on the big issues. We don't need pontificating, we need action. And it is really frustrating. So I have a question for you when you look back at Reagan, one of the things Reagan was given the highest praise for was the fact that he was able to use the quote-unquote bully pulpit, but do so in a way that didn't really make people feel bullied. It was kind of like your articulate grandfather explaining in simple but effective English in a respectful manner points that most people understood. Even if you didn't agree with it, you understood, and it was very powerful. It seems to me that we should be able to get the same thing from Congress, but I haven't seen any of that. Have you seen?
There's a structural problem there. That the executive, the president, enjoys the bully pulpit. The Speaker of the House, the minority leader, majority leader of the Senate do not in the same way. That the party, when it is out of power, lacks it's not the parliamentary system. It doesn't have that one guy out there speaking for it in a compelling fashion, and certainly. John Boehner, I think, is never going to fit that bill. Mitch McConnell is a skilled parliamentarian. He doesn't have a majority, and even if he had a majority, it might not be a working majority with the loose cannons which abound in the Senate. But Obama, as wooden an orator as he is, I think more and more people are catching on to that. He can speak with one voice, and also when he speaks with that voice, all the other voices on that side of the aisle fall into line very, very quickly, no matter how absurd the argument.
Now, I have two related questions on this. One is when you look at presidential history, very often a president has somebody they could work with, but that they also work against, right? And of course, going back to Reagan, right? Reagan had a Democratic leadership that he actually seemed to work fairly well with. So the question is, in history, where have you seen an opposition where the opposition party actually did a very effective job of having their leader articulate the opposing cause? And it doesn't necessarily have to be a conservative cause.
Well, in the late 30s, actually, the Congress pretty much brought the New Deal to a halt. And it was a coalition effort. It was the Republicans, the more conservative Republicans, because back then, even more so than today, there was quite the cohort of progressives. But there was a great group of conservative or moderate Democrats who were realizing that the New Deal had to be reined in. And even before World War II starts, the New Deal is essentially stopped. I think that was very effective as an opposition, which was so strange because it comes right after 1936, when Franklin Roosevelt should be unstoppable, when he's won all but 2 states. And that illustrates the point that power seems invincible until it isn't. And that can occur very, very quickly, whether it's Roosevelt in 36, whether it's Richard Nixon in 72 and 74, or Woodrow Wilson coming off a win in 1916, that the wheels can fall off very, very quickly. And it is up to the opposition to take advantage of that. But I think that will come from the grassroots again. 2010 didn't come out of the RNC in Washington. It came out of the grassroots.
Well, fortunately, we have the technology that can facilitate that. I'm going to raise one other concern, which is actually, I believe, one of the biggest hidden concerns that I rarely hear discussed. Forget the fact that we may disagree with much of what the president does. Let's just say for a minute he's our leader and we support him in his efforts. It feels to me like this president, after almost 5 years, has failed to build any true worldwide partners. I don't get the sense that there's a major leader out there that has anything near the relationship that, say, Reagan had with Thatcher or Roosevelt had maybe with de Gaulle. And to me, the risk therein is when you look at all the world's problems, if you don't have that true sort of foxhole bond at the most executive leadership level, it's going to be much harder to take on any of these challenges, even if the president was inclined to make good, informed, America-friendly decisions.
Yeah, it's a pattern which repeats itself. There's a famous picture, very recent, of Putin and Obama sitting before a camera with their backs to each other, showing unbelievable hostility. Obama goes to Africa, and all of a sudden there's a blowback from one of the West African leaders about being lectured on homosexuality. And whether it's Angela Merkel or even Islamic leaders, he seems to not be able to connect, and probably because he can't connect. If he could connect, he would be working with deals with Congress to bring people together and say, what do you want? Here's what I want. What do you want? What do you need? How can we bring this together? And he seems incapable of that, either on a domestic or a foreign basis. The one leader he seems to be getting along with is Cameron of Britain. And I wonder how long his shelf life is. I suspect not very long.
That's a very astute analysis. I want to bring up 2 things that you'd mentioned earlier, of course. When we're looking at the policy of Obamacare today, I think we could all, there's one argument that's being made that, we're socializing medicine. The fact is that in the 60s, when they implemented programs such as Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid and all these things, that was the beginning of the socialization of our country's healthcare system. This is simply finishing the job, if you will. And so I think the argument should really be, we've done this. We have systems in place that are now bankrupt. We need to do something in a different manner, or we're just going to have an even larger system that will eventually bankrupt us even further. Then the other statement I would make is, it's interesting to me that the GOP, when they should be fighting and continuing to argue for a resolution on something such as Benghazi, where, as you mentioned, Fast and Furious, where any of these other, NSA wiretapping, the abuse of members of the media and journalists, so on and so forth, the Internal Revenue Service. These are the things that the Congress should be investigating and dealing with right now, along with trying to get the president to respond to serious threats such as Iran. But instead, the leadership in the GOP is trying to sell us immigration reform. It says
that's what
all.
They're concentrating on.
It says it all, David.
Yes, and it's not what their base is demanding. There's been some recent polls out there which indicates that's not what the Hispanic community is demanding. And irony of irony, what we're seeing now is really the flow of illegal immigrants into America turning into a trickle. And there's a very good reason for that. Our unemployment rate is around 7%. Theirs is 5%. This is no longer the streets are paved with gold land. And it's a sad commentary on what we've come to and how this economy is being ground into the dust. But Obama has been so very good at changing the subject from item to item, to going on a trip to Africa, or talking about a shooting in Florida, or whatever. And the media follows these shiny objects around and moves the conversation from whatever really it should be on at that moment, which is the economy, or about the NSA, or about the IRS. And so the people watching their reality shows night after night ignore the biggest and most gruesome reality show in town.
It's amazing to me. We've seen some gang members of the mob who, it seemed like, people just loved them no matter what they did. They were just like idolized, and so were shown in a bigger than reality life and within the media. And then you have a guy like Clinton who, nothing seemed to stick to Clinton either, except for the fact that he actually was impeached. He actually did something wrong and was brought, to some sort of justice for it. At the very least, it was embarrassing for him. But
yeah,
this president,
I think you're touching on something very interesting, which is in the Catholic baptismal rite, which you've probably seen like in The Godfather or something. They ask on behalf of the infant, if it is an infant, do you reject Satan? Do you reject the glamour of evil? And people have always been attracted to the glamour of evil. That's just kind of the way we are. But we are really, really, really attracted to it in this era, which is why it explains why Bill Clinton is so popular, perhaps in part because of his scandal-plagued life, why we are seeing Spitzer and Weiner staging remarkable comebacks in New York City, and this the Sopranos thing. Why people were so taken by the death of Gandolfini. Was listening in the car to Fox News on Sirius XM when the news of that came in, and it was like the world has come to an end. Where Shep Smith was just like transfixed. He could not talk. And the whole network was like turning on a dime to deal with this essentially nothing story. Because we are just transfixed right now by the glamour of evil. I'm not saying he personally was, but what that character represented.
Oh, sure. The person I was thinking of before was John Gotti. Gotti was loved.
Yes.
He was loved in his neighborhood. People disappeared, but he was loved.
Yeah, it's not good. It's not good at all. It's just we've always sort of enjoyed those I mean, there was lovable rogues before, so to speak, James J. Walker and people like that. But eventually they were told to leave, and they left, and they didn't come back. And that's part of the difference now. It's like, okay, come back. Part of the deal with Spitzer, which he didn't seem to understand, and maybe he can get away with it on a temporal basis, but the deal was go away, unspoken, go away, and all these other charges against you, which were significant, will go away too. But part of that is you stay away. And he doesn't understand that, and it appears that the Democratic primary voters in the city of New York do not understand it either. It'll be very interesting to see what happens there if it turns into a three-way race. That could be very interesting because Mr. Stringer, the prior favorite in this race, has some minor party lines. He will still be on the ballot if Spitzer wins, and there is a very qualified black Republican, I think named Burnett, who will be on the ballot. So this might be a very interesting three-way thing in the manner of, say, a James Buckley or John Lindsay, where all of a sudden people sneak in with a minority vote.
Yeah, there's another interesting race, and that's the Senate race in New Jersey. Why you brought up races, and
talking about questionable individuals.
Obama Jr. in Cory Booker.
Well, I was thinking more of Menendez, but yes, you're right.
Well, I find this very ironic. Let me just give a little background here. New Jersey hasn't had a Republican senator, I think it goes back to 78. And when there was an election going on, and I can't remember the fellow's name, but he had some legal trouble, so he was going to lose the race for the Democrats. And it was just before the election, and they went to court, and the judge said, well, I'm going to ignore law and allow you to put Frank Lautenberg back on the ticket. And so Lautenberg becomes the senator because he was a very well-known name and a big figure in New Jersey, so he easily won, even though he should never have been allowed on the ballot. And the argument was that we had to put him on there because the people in New Jersey deserve to be represented. And when I heard that, I said, well, what about the millions of conservative or even moderate people or Republicans that have lived in New Jersey for all these decades who are never represented? And the argument was just ridiculous to me. So then you have Menendez, who gets appointed because John Corzine goes from the Senate to becoming the governor, and of course we all know about Corzine. But then Chris Christie has
slow motion prosecution.
Oh yes, which by the way, it's only civil; it's not criminal. And then Chris Christie has the opportunity to appoint a good conservative to at least an 18-month period where he has some track record to be able to run for Senate in the next election. But I think because it's too close to Chris Christie's election cycle, he didn't want any part of that. And so he nominates somebody who may, in my opinion, may as well be a Democrat. And now we see this race of a Cory Booker type, Barbara Boino, Alietta Eck, and Steve Lonigan and a couple lesser-known people battling out for it. But chances are that we'll have another Democratic senator from New Jersey, and the story will go on and on and on, and millions of people will not be represented again.
Right, and they had a chance. At least they had a chance for a better representation on a short-term basis.
Yes.
But the entire staggering and creating two elections in place of one, basically for the governor's convenience, is when he didn't even need it. Didn't even need to do it. It's sort of like the Watergate burglary. It's like, were you really afraid you were going to lose to McGovern? Was this burglary necessary? Is this stunt necessary? You're going to win anyway. But evidently when you can get away with things and be cute, and Chris Christie has been cute now for a while, he's determined to just do what he can because, as Clinton said about his activities in the White House, why did you do it? Because I could.
Well, perhaps he shares some of the same advisors as Mitt Romney had. Well, anyway, that's what's going on in New York and New Jersey, and I get a similar story in other liberal states. But anyway, David, it's been fabulous having you. I want to give you an opportunity to plug some of your books or some of the projects that you're working on.
Okay, well, we've got our trilogy of presidential election histories out there, 1920, 1960, and 1948, with appropriate subtitles. And speaking of the glamour of evil, we have our Rothstein, the Lifetimes, and Murder of the Criminal Genius Who Fixed the 1919 World Series, featured in the New Jersey program, Boardwalk Empire, and the book is a pretty good story too, maybe better.
and I've got a copy of all of them, and I haven't read that one yet, but I've read the election books, all incredibly interesting and full of so much detail. It's a fantastic work. Again, David Pietrusza, and it's been a pleasure having you join us. Thank you very much.
Good to be back.
All right, take it easy. Bye.